The room smelled like sweat and old wood. Oakland, 1965. A rented studio above a drugstore on Broadway. Exposed brick walls that held the cold. Single window facing the street. Glass so old it warped the streetlights outside into strange shapes. 20 people, maybe less. Sitting cross-legged on hardwood that creaked when you shifted your weight. The floorboards were stained dark from years of feet. Years of movement. The kind of wear that comes from repetition. From bodies learning things that minds resist. Bruce Lee stood in the center wearing black cotton and bare feet. He wasn't teaching that night. Not in the traditional sense. He'd called it an open session, a demonstration for those who wanted to understand what he meant when he said classical martial arts were dying from the inside out, that the old ways had calcified into ritual, that most schools were teaching the memory of combat, not combat itself. Most of the faces were curious. A few were hostile. The room had been silent for the better part of an hour. Bruce had moved through forms, slow, deliberate, nothing flashy. He'd shown them how a punch could originate from the heel, how the power traveled up through the ankle, the knee, the hip, the shoulder, and only arrived at the fist last. How a stance was just frozen footwork, how every block was a strike that hadn't committed yet. He moved like water finding its level, no wasted motion, no theatrics. Some nodded, some frowned. Some had already decided he was full of shit before they walked in. One man in particular. In the back corner sat a man named Rick, 6'3", 220, ex-football from a small college in Oregon. He'd blown out his knee junior year and ended up in Oakland working construction, framing houses, pouring foundations. His hands had mixed concrete for 8 hours that same day, arms like bridge cable, shoulders that stretched his flannel shirt tight across the back. He'd come because a friend dragged him. Eddie, a guy from the crew, who'd been training with Bruce for 2 months and wouldn't shut up about it. Rick had resisted for weeks, but Eddie wore him down. "Just come see," Eddie had said. "You don't have to believe. Just watch." So Rick came, and he'd stayed because he didn't believe a word Bruce said. Rick had watched men fight. Real fights. Parking lots, job sites, bars on Friday, nights when paychecks ran dry and tempers didn't. He knew what violence looked like. It was big. It was fast. It was ugly. It was the sound of knuckles on bone and the sight of blood on concrete. This looked like dancing. Bruce had been talking for maybe 10 minutes. Soft voice, barely above conversational volume. No grandstanding. No shouting. He spoke about tension and relaxation, about how most fighters carried their power in all the wrong places, in their shoulders, their necks, their jaws, how a clenched fist was a locked door that trapped energy instead of releasing it, how the body had to be like water, formless, adaptive, without ego. Rick shifted his weight. His jaw worked. He glanced at Eddie, who sat beside him with the kind of reverence Rick didn't understand. Eddie's eyes were locked on Bruce like he was watching a prophet. Finally, Rick stood. The movement was loud in the quiet room. His boots, steel-toed Carolinas, caked with dried mud, announced every shift of weight. "Can I ask you something?" The room went still. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. A woman near the front stopped writing in her notebook. An older Chinese man in traditional clothes looked up sharply. Bruce turned too, smooth and unhurried, his gaze settling on Rick like a lamp swinging toward a sound in the dark. No smile, no aggression, just attention. "Go ahead." Rick stepped forward. The floor announced every step. He wasn't trying to intimidate. He just moved the way big men move, unavoidably. The space had to adjust to him, not the other way around. "You're saying size doesn't matter. Strength doesn't matter. That it's all about, what, technique?" Bruce's face remained neutral. His hands hung loose at his sides. "I'm saying most people use strength like a crutch. They depend on it. So when it's not enough, they have nothing else." Rick nodded slowly. He wasn't mocking. He was testing. "And you think technique beats strength?" "I think strength without understanding is just tension. Looking for a place to go." "Okay." Rick stopped a few feet away. He could see Bruce clearly now. Smaller than he'd expected. Maybe 5'7", 135, lean, defined but not bulky. The kind of build that looked fast but not powerful. Rick had 50 pounds on him. 6 inches of reach, hands twice the size. He looked around the room, then back at Bruce. His voice stayed even. "Prove it." "How?" "Let me grab your throat." Silence. The kind that rings in your ears. No one moved. The woman near the window tensed, her shoulders drawing up. A man in the front row stopped breathing. Eddie's eyes went wide. Bruce didn't blink. Several seconds passed. Someone coughed nervously. Then Bruce spoke. "You want to choke me?" "No." Rick's voice was steady. Respectful even. "I want to hold you. No punching. No kicking. Just a grip. You stand there, I grab your throat with one hand. And if you can get out without hitting me, without twisting my fingers or doing some joint lock thing, I'll believe you. I'll believe everything you've said tonight." Someone in the back muttered something that sounded like, "This is crazy." Rick didn't hear it clearly. Bruce did, but his expression didn't change. He studied Rick, not with anger, not with fear, with curiosity almost, like Rick was a problem worth considering. 5 seconds, 10. The silence stretched. Rick felt his pulse in his temples, felt the eyes of 20 people on him, felt the weight of the challenge he'd just issued. Then Bruce nodded. "All right." A ripple passed through the room. Shock, anticipation, fear maybe. Eddie grabbed Rick's arm. "Man, you don't have to." Rick shook him off gently. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Not entirely. Rick felt it too. He hadn't expected Bruce to agree. Most instructors would have deflected, made excuses, reframed the question. But Bruce just stepped into the open center of the room, into a space where the overhead light cast his shadow long and sharp, arms at his sides, shoulders loose, breathing normal. He looked at Rick and tipped his head forward slightly. An invitation. "Whenever you're ready." Rick approached. His heart was beating faster now. Not from fear, from the strangeness of it, the unreality. He'd challenged men before, but never like this. Never in a room so quiet you could hear fabric shift when someone breathed. Never with this sense of ceremony. He lifted his right hand, thick fingers, calloused palm, knuckles scarred from years of manual labor, and hesitated. "You're sure?" Bruce's eyes didn't waver. Dark, unreadable. "I'm sure." Rick placed his hand around Bruce's throat. Not violent, not sudden, firm, deliberate. His thumb pressed into one side of the windpipe, fingers wrapping the other. The kind of grip that ends bar fights. The kind that says, "This is over, stay down." Bruce's neck disappeared into Rick's hand. It felt thin, fragile. Rick could feel the cartilage under his thumb. The pulse, steady, unhurried. The heat of skin. The room held its breath. Rick felt the smallness of Bruce's neck, the vulnerability. A wrong move, too much pressure, and this could go very badly. He wasn't here to hurt anyone. He just wanted to know if the things Bruce said were real. Bruce didn't move. His eyes stayed open, calm, no panic, no reaction. He stood there, throat enclosed, and did nothing. Rick waited. Gave Bruce a moment to respond, to escape, to do whatever technique he claimed would work. Nothing. Rick squeezed. Not crushing, just enough to prove the point. Enough pressure that anyone else would have gagged. Pulled back, swung wild, tried to break free. Bruce inhaled through his nose, slow, controlled. The air passed through some narrow channel Rick's hand hadn't closed. He felt it, felt the breath navigate around his grip like water around a stone. How was he even breathing? Rick's confusion deepened. He tightened his grip incrementally. His forearm flexed. He could feel the muscles in Bruce's neck now, the tendons, the structure. And then Bruce's weight shifted. It wasn't a step. It wasn't a lean. It was something underneath movement, a microscopic change in how his body sat in space. His hips dropped half an inch, maybe less. His spine settled. His head floated upward, as if suspended by a string from the ceiling. Rick's hand was still there, still gripping, but something had changed. The pressure felt hollow, like he was squeezing a shape that no longer existed in the same way, like the throat he was holding had somehow become less solid. He squeezed harder, tried to reestablish control. His forearm flexed. Veins rose along the muscle, but it felt wrong now, like holding smoke. The pressure was there, but the connection wasn't. Bruce's eyes stayed on his. No fear, no challenge, just presence. Just a man standing in a room waiting. Rick's breathing quickened. Frustration crept in at the edges. This wasn't supposed to happen. The grip was solid. His hand was closed. Bruce should have been stuck. He adjusted his stance, planted his feet wider, leaned his weight forward, tried to dominate the position, tried to use his size, his strength to anchor Bruce in place. And that's when Bruce's shoulder dropped. Just one side, the right, barely visible. A rotation so subtle it could have been a trick of the light, a shadow shifting. His body began to sink, not collapsing, not crumpling, melting, like water poured from a glass. like ice cream sliding off a cone on a hot day. His knees bent, his center of gravity lowered, and his spine seemed to compress and lengthen at the same time. Something that shouldn't have been physically possible but was happening right in front of Rick's eyes. Rick's hand followed. Instinct. Gravity. He bent forward to keep the grip, to maintain the pressure, and in that half-second of adjustment, his balance broke. The world tilted. His weight, which had been stacked and solid, feet, knees, hips, shoulders all in vertical alignment, suddenly had nothing beneath it. He felt his right foot lift slightly, felt his left knee buckle, felt his upper body lurch forward into empty space. It wasn't a throw. Bruce didn't grab him. Didn't twist his wrist or hook his leg or shove his chest or strike him anywhere. He just wasn't there anymore. The weight Rick had been gripping, the structure he'd been pressing against, had dissolved, evaporated, like trying to lean on a door that someone opened from the other side. And Rick, overcommitted, top-heavy, fell forward. His left hand shot out. Reflex. He caught himself on one knee, palm flat against the floor. The impact echoed through the room like a gunshot. Pain shot through his kneecap, sharp, immediate. His right hand was still extended, fingers open, shaped around a throat, empty. Bruce stood 3 feet away, untouched, throat unmarked. Breathing normal. His hands hung loose at his sides. He hadn't raised them, hadn't formed fists, hadn't touched Rick at all. He looked exactly as he had before Rick grabbed him. Calm, centered, present, only now he was somewhere else. No one spoke. Rick stayed down for a moment, staring at the floor. His chest rose and fell. Sweat beaded on his temple despite the cold. His right hand trembled slightly, still shaped around a throat that was no longer there. His mind raced. He replayed it. The grip. The pressure. The moment Bruce sank. But he couldn't find the point where it had gone wrong. There was no technique to identify. No move to name. Then he looked up at Bruce, and his face carried something between confusion and fear. What did you just do? Bruce's expression didn't change. His voice remained soft. I used your pressure. You were holding me, so I let you hold nothing. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Rick stood slowly, deliberately. His knee ached where it had hit the floor. He rubbed his right hand, flexed his fingers, checked his own body like something might be missing. His knees felt weak. His balance felt off like he'd been spun around in the dark. I didn't feel you move. I didn't move the way you expected. I don't understand. Bruce stepped closer, not threatening, just closing the distance between them. His voice dropped, quiet enough that the people in the back had to lean in, had to hold their breath to hear. You grabbed my throat because you believed the throat was the target. But I'm not in my throat. I'm not in my arms or my chest or my legs. When you fight someone's body, you fight the wrong war. The body is just structure. And structure? He tapped his own sternum lightly. Once. The sound was soft. Can be emptied. Rick stared at him. His mouth opened, closed. He wanted to argue. Wanted to say it was a trick, a fluke. That if he tried again, he'd figure it out, he'd adjust, But he didn't believe that. He'd felt it. The absence. The void where a man should have been. It was like grabbing a handful of water. The harder you squeezed, the less you held. Rick sat down, right there in the middle of the floor. Legs crossed and didn't speak again. His hands rested on his knees. He stared at nothing. His friend Eddie came over, crouched beside him, whispered something. Rick didn't respond. Bruce looked around the room. His gaze passed over each face. Some watched with awe, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Some with suspicion, arms crossed, trying to find the angle, the trick. One man in the front row looked pale, like he'd seen something he couldn't categorize, like a magic trick performed with physics instead of deception. A woman near the window raised her hand slightly, tentatively. Can you teach that? Bruce considered the question. Several seconds passed. I can teach the principle. Whether you learn it is up to you. What principle? That force is only useful when it meets resistance. Remove the resistance and force has nowhere to go. It collapses under its own weight. Another voice from the side. A younger man, maybe 20. But how do you remove it? By not being what they expect to find. That's too vague. Bruce nodded. Then you're not ready for it yet. The young man bristled but said nothing. An older Chinese man spoke in Cantonese. Bruce answered in the same language, a brief exchange that lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then the man nodded, satisfied. The answers weren't satisfying to most. They created more questions, opened more doors than they closed. But Bruce didn't explain further, didn't repeat the demonstration, didn't offer wisdom or teaching beyond what he'd already given. He just walked to the corner where his bag sat, picked up a towel, wiped his hands slowly, and draped it over his shoulder. "We're done for tonight." The session ended. People stood, stretched, filed toward the door. Some moved quickly, eager to leave, to process what they'd seen somewhere else, somewhere safer. Others lingered, whispering to each other in tight clusters, glancing back at Bruce, at Rick still sitting on the floor. A few tried to ask Bruce questions. He answered in one or two words, polite but distant. "Maybe, tomorrow, we'll see." He wasn't being cold. He just had nothing more to say. The distance in his voice wasn't rudeness. It was finality. Rick stayed seated on the floor for a while. 5 minutes, 10. His friend Eddie eventually helped him up. Rick's legs were stiff. He felt older than he had an hour ago. They left without looking back, boots heavy on the wooden stairs outside, descending into the Oakland night. The last person out was a young man named Daniel, a college student from Berkeley who'd been training with Bruce for 3 months. He paused at the door, hand on the frame, backlit by the dim hallway light. Sifu, what would have happened if he didn't let go? Bruce glanced at him. For the first time that night, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not pride, something older. Something that had seen this question before, in other rooms. Other cities, other faces. He would have let go. How do you know? Bruce turned off the light switch. The room fell into shadow, lit only by the street lamp outside filtering through the warped window glass. Orange light slanted across the floor, cutting the space in half. Because I wasn't there to hold. Daniel stood in the doorway, silhouette against the hallway, trying to understand. But you were there. I saw you. We all saw you. Bruce walked past him into the hallway. His footsteps were silent on the old floor. His voice echoed slightly in the narrow space. You saw a body. That's not the same thing. Daniel wanted to ask more. His mouth opened. But something in Bruce's tone, not harsh, not dismissive. Just complete, said the conversation was over. He left. Bruce locked the door behind him, the old deadbolt clicking into place with a sound like finality. And then Bruce stood alone in the dark studio, listening to the city hum below. Cars passing on Broadway, distant voices from the bar 2 blocks down. A siren somewhere in West Oakland, blocks away, moving farther. He rolled his neck once, slowly, felt the faint echo of pressure where Rick's hand had been. The skin was unmarked, unbruised, but the memory of the grip lingered, a ghost of force that had found nothing to crush, nothing to break. Bruce walked to the window and looked down at Broadway. Streetlights in both directions, neon signs, the drugstore, a diner, a laundromat still open. People moving through their lives, unaware that 20 feet above them, something had happened that none of them would believe even if they'd witnessed it. He thought about Rick, about the look on his face when he'd hit the floor. The confusion first, then the fear. Not fear of Bruce, fear of not understanding. Fear that the world worked differently than he'd believed for 30-some years. Bruce had seen that look before. In Hong Kong, in basements and rooftops where challenges were issued and answered. In Seattle, in the back of his first school when a karate instructor had come to test him. In every place, someone tested him and found something they couldn't explain, couldn't replicate, couldn't defend against. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about proving he was better. It was about showing them that the fight they thought they understood didn't exist, not in the way they believed. Bruce turned away from the window, moved through the dark room. He checked that the space heater was off, unplugged, that the window latch was secure, that nothing was left that could burn or break or cause trouble in his absence. Small rituals, ordinary tasks. Then he walked down the back stairs, narrow, steep wood worn smooth in the centers from decades of feet, and disappeared into the Oakland night, leaving nothing behind but questions no one knew how to ask. Blocks away, Rick sat in his truck in a parking lot behind a closed hardware store. Engine off, keys in his hand, staring at his hands under the yellow glow of a sodium vapor light. He'd grabbed men before, in high school, in college, on job sites when someone got stupid. He'd held them, felt them struggle, felt them push and pull and try to break free. This was different. This was like grabbing air, like trying to hold wind. He started the engine. The old Ford rumbled to life. He drove home through empty streets, radio off, thinking. He didn't tell his wife what happened. When she asked how it went, he just said interesting and left it at that. But he couldn't stop thinking about it. For 3 weeks he thought about it. At work, at dinner, in bed staring at the ceiling. The moment replayed in his mind like a film loop. The grip, the shift, the fall. Finally, he came back. It was a Tuesday night. Cold, raining. Bruce was teaching a small class, 6 people, working on footwork and timing. Rick appeared in the doorway, soaked, hat in his hands. Bruce was demonstrating something mid-sentence, and he saw Rick and stopped. The room went quiet. Bruce looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Rick didn't ask questions this time. Didn't challenge, didn't test. He just sat down in the back corner, water dripping from his jacket onto the old wood floor. And over the following months he learned, not the technique Bruce had used. That remained elusive, something felt rather than understood. But he learned to let go of what he thought he knew, learned that strength without structure was just noise, learned that the body could lie, but balance never did. And slowly, sitting in that room above Broadway, Rick began to understand what Bruce had meant. That the fight wasn't in the hands. It was in the space between intention and action, the place where force goes when it finds nothing to break.